climate change, honestly, to promote a particular agenda that they have. They have a very real agenda, and they're using the notion of climate change in order to push this broader agenda that they have. We're not going to talk about that. I think those of us who are more conservatively minded downplay the whole idea politically. We downplay the idea of climate change as a pretty big scam, and we don't really believe so much in that if we were talking from a political point of view. We're not going to address this from a political point of view. That's not our intention. Really, it's not our job, and it wouldn't even be appropriate for us to do that. But what we want to do, instead of talking about climate change from a political standpoint, I want to talk about climate change and what the Bible actually says about our climate and the potential that it could change. So climate change, what does the Bible say? I try to keep it brief tonight. We're not going to talk too long about this. I think it's a pretty quick thing. It's a pretty quick subject to cover, actually, but I do think it's kind of interesting. I want to stop just briefly. Thank you for being here. Thanks for coming out in the middle of the night to assemble for worship on Sunday. I can't believe this time change just drives me crazy. And it is just pitch black already at early after, not too late in the afternoon, very early in the evening, it just turns completely black and dark. Thanks for coming tonight. We appreciate you so much. Thanks to our visitors especially for coming our way. All right, what about climate change from a biblical perspective? What would the Bible have to say about this? Well, first of all, let's point out a couple of basic fundamental truths. God created the earth, obviously, and he promised to sustain it until the earth and the physical creation have accomplished or fulfilled the purposes for which he did create it. All right? So we believe without doubt, and we're not even going to take time to try to establish this truth, we believe without a doubt God is the almighty creator of the heavens and the earth. And he created the earth with a purpose in mind. And he has said that he was going to sustain the earth and keep it functioning until it has accomplished the purposes for which he originally created. Creation was not a random act. Creation was part of an eternal plan that God had. God had a purpose in making all of creation. He had and has a purpose for his creation. The earth. How could we say it? Even that the ecosystem of planet Earth will be maintained until it has accomplished the purposes that God had in mind for it. In Hebrews chapter 1, beginning verse 2, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2, in these last days God has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. And notice, he upholds the universe by the word of his power. It's kind of an interesting thing, and we don't know all the details of how the mechanics of this, but how does all of the universe keep working in such amazing clockwork perfection? It's really amazing. So much so, did you know that next April, I think it's April 8th, isn't it, Sarah? April 8th, there's going to be a total solar eclipse. It won't come all the way here. Just a little bit west of us will be a total solar eclipse. I believe it's April 8th. They know the time. I was looking at a map recently. They are actually able to tell as this eclipse will travel from the southwest to the northeast. And you can put in a given city, and they are able to tell you the exact time when the eclipse will reach totality at that specific point on the map. How can they do that? How can they be so accurate? How can they know for sure? How can they predict this? Because this whole creation of God just works like an amazing clock in absolute perfection. And this text tells us that he is upholding the universe. He's keeping it working. The reason it continues to work in such clock-like fashion is because God is behind the scenes keeping it so. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, by his word, the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire, kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. So notice, the present heavens and earth, they're being reserved by his word. His word, he's keeping things here. Now notice, there's an ultimate end to this. There's going to be a day of judgment. There's going to be a destruction of ungodly men. But these things, the earth and all the systems, all the physical systems on earth are being reserved or kept functioning until such a time as God has intended to bring it all to a close. And so I do think it's fair for us to say that God is sustaining the world, and it's going to fulfill his purposes, and it will not come to an end until that has happened. Now, having said that, then I think we could go further and say the current climate change alarms, and you know there are all kinds of alarmists talking about all kinds of horrible things that will happen if men don't curtail their burning of fossil fuels, if we don't go back to walking and riding bicycles instead of driving cars, there's just going to be all kinds of calamity. Coastal cities will be flooded, and parts of the earth will become uninhabitable because they'll be so very, very hot. I'm going to tell you, those alarms that are being raised are not really significant to people who believe the Bible for some very basic reasons. The first reason is we already understand that God placed man in dominion over creation and gave him a mandate to be a steward of creation. So we're not out here purposefully destroying the environment. We aren't doing things intentionally to bring harm to planet Earth. That we know better than that because we understand the things that are taught in the Word of God. God placed man in dominion. The word dominion means to rule over, to be in control of, to have power over something. That's the idea of dominion. And so no climate change agenda is needed to make God's people aware of their duty as stewards with dominion over his creation. Look in Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth on the earth." And there's that word dominion. And so when God created all things, all the physical universe, all the living things on planet Earth, when he created man and gave man dominion over his creation, over all the things on planet Earth, over all the living things that are here. And so that, again, that idea of dominion is to rule over or to have control over. Now, I believe that it's clear that early on that this dominion or power that God gave to man over his creation, God gave dominion, but he gave them that power to be good stewards over what he had created. And I would argue that from chapter 2, I think you know very well, verse 15, Genesis 2:15. The Lord took man and put him into the Garden of Eden, notice, to dress it and to keep it. I would argue that there's sort of an implied point there concerning man's relationship to the physical creation. Man's job is to be a steward, to dress, to keep, to use the creation. He has dominion. He has control over all things. He has power, that he can exercise power. But I think implied in it that you would be a good steward of what God has placed under your dominion. Look again in Psalm chapter 8, beginning verse 3. The psalmist said, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings, and have crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heaven, the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea." And so again, notice, God gave dominion to man. And again, with, I think, an implied and understood stewardship relationship to what God has given us control over. All right? So we don't need some climate change alarmist to tell us, you got to be careful, you got to take care of the earth. We know that. We understand that. And I think as the people of God, we act in such a fashion. Our intention is not to do harm, but to use God's creation in the ways that he intended because he has placed us over his creation. Now, when you get to the climate itself, we believe that God controls the climate. So we're talking now specifically about climate matters, because that's what we hear about in the news all the time. And when it comes specifically to the climate, the Bible tells us that God controls the climate. In fact, he controls the climate just like he controls everything else. Look at Matthew chapter 5. This is a famous statement of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. Your Father in heaven, notice, he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good. He sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. How is it that the sun comes up every morning? How is it that we get the rains at their due seasons? Because God has set that whole system in order. He maintains it. It's not in our control. We've been experiencing a really dry period lately. And if it had been up to us, we might have said, yeah, I'd like to have had some rain in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But it's not up to us, but it is in control of God. We're not able to control the climate, but God is. He makes the sun rise. He sends the rain. There's a really interesting statement in Job, in the Old Testament book of Job, chapter 37. Verse 5, God thundereth marvelously with his voice. Great things doeth he, we cannot comprehend. For he saith to the snow, be thou on the earth, likewise to the small rain and to the great rain of his strength. So notice, here in Job, it suggests God is directly involved in climate matters. As he maintains the earth, as he preserves it for his purposes, that he is specifically in control of the earth. I think it's interesting that we cannot comprehend it all. I think men imagine that we're just so knowledgeable. We have such intellect and capacity. We can perceive and understand everything. We actually can't, right? When it comes to the climate, it's pretty disappointing that the weathermen usually can't even give us a very accurate 5-day weather prediction. They tell us what's supposed to happen in the next 5 days, and so often that doesn't even come true. If we can't even make an accurate 5-day weather forecast, then that certainly emphasizes what is said here in the book of Job. We can't comprehend all that God does, but we do know, as this verse clearly teaches us, that he's directly involved in controlling climate. God is in control. I would argue that we have very limited ability to alter the climate at all. It's just not something that we have the power to do. I believe that we overestimate man's ability to affect Earth and the climate on Earth. I think again, some people are pushing a specific agenda with this climate change business, but I think they're way overstating the ability that we have in order to affect these things. We are not even real good, as I said, at making a 5-day weather prediction, let alone altering the climate on planet Earth. So at the end of Noah's flood, in the text that Ben read for us just a few minutes ago, there's a really important statement. This might deserve to be underlined in your text if you make marks in your Bible or scribble in your margins. At the end of Noah's flood, God made some promises. And read with me again, Genesis 8, beginning verse 21. The Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. Notice this, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night, shall not cease. So there's an order of things that happens. And he mentions them here. So there's seed time. Well, that would be our springtime. And then harvest in the fall. And cold in the winter and heat in the summer. And, of course, the seasons of summer and winter. But even day and night. These things are not going to be suspended. This is not going to stop. Notice, how long is that going to happen? He says right here, while the earth remains. Now, we understand we're going to talk here in a minute about the fact the earth is going to be brought to an end. The whole physical universe will be destroyed. But as long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Climate alarmists want to say, oh man, we're going to make it so there is no winter. We're going to be overrun with consuming heat. It's all going to be hot. No, there's going to be cold and there's going to be heat. There's going to be summer and there's going to be winter. And we're not going to be, God promised that. We're not going to be able to change that. You know, in the next chapter, in chapter 9, this context runs on it. And you remember in chapter 9, the first verses of chapter 9, God promises the rainbow is a sign of the covenant that he has with mankind to preserve this operating system. I remember when I was in grade school, that was a long time ago, but I remember when I was in grade school, we had big scares about nuclear war. And some of you who are as old as I am may remember, we even had drills in school. What would happen if suddenly Russia launched nuclear weapons our way? And we had drills as to what we would do. And we would get out and line the hallway, or alternately, we would get under our desk. I'm just not sure how much getting under a desk would help if there was a nuclear attack. But one of the things I remember really worried me, because they were saying if this nuclear war breaks out and they start shooting these bombs, that all of this will go, all of this bomb debris and all of the aftermath of the nuclear bombs will go up high into the upper atmosphere, and it'll block the sun, and there will be a nuclear winter. And it'll be 2 or 3 years before we ever see the sun again. And almost everything on planet Earth will die. There will be no summer. It will be all winter, a nuclear winter, dark and very gloomy, and everything will die. And I was really, as a kid, they had me really worried about that. I was really fretful about it. But finally, I think someone pointed out this verse. This verse says that's not going to happen. While the earth stands, there's always going to be cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night, seed time and harvest. God's not going to let that happen. God's in control of the climate. We have very limited power to change any of that. And so I think we need to be realistic. While we hear all these alarms being voiced, we need to be realistic about that. There's one area where we can exercise some influence over the climate, if you will, and that is the area of prayer. We have our efforts relative to the climate, as I say here, are limited primarily to prayer, and you probably already guessed where I'm thinking about, and that's in James chapter 5 when it talks about what Elijah did in the days of King Ahab in Israel. Elijah was a man, this is James 5 beginning verse 17, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain, and for 3 years and 6 months it did not rain on the earth. Then he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and earth bore its fruit. You know, Elijah didn't work a miracle to cause it to stop raining. And he didn't work a miracle to cause it to start raining again. In fact, this text is actually saying Elijah was exercising the same kind of powers that we have. Elijah was a man like we are. And he prayed. God heard his prayer. God responded by sending a drought. And at the end of 3 years, Elijah prayed again, and God heard his prayer, and the rain came back. So, and the very real point of James referring to Elijah is he was just a man. He was just a man exercising the same kind of powers that we have, of powers of prayer. And so we can pray. It's appropriate to pray about things, all kinds of things. And it would even be appropriate to pray for rain, for instance, as Elijah prayed for rain. And my guess is that some of us have done that from time to time. You know, especially if it's during the growing season. I think about the Tombses and their crops in the field. I'm satisfied that they pray that maybe it will rain. It's not wrong. It's altogether appropriate. We have that power. But I think that's probably the extent of the power that we have to influence over the climate is to engage in prayer. Okay, so here are some observations. Certainly, God created earth, and he promised to sustain it, and he does. He has an intended purpose for this planet and for this whole universe, and he's going to keep things functioning like a very fine-tuned clock until he is ready to bring it all to an end. He placed us here. He gave us dominion over all his creation with an implied stewardship relationship to his creation. We understand that. We're not going to purposefully do things that are harmful to our creation or to our earth. We believe that God controls the climate. we don't have very much power to alter the climate. We can pray about this. But one last, probably most important observation of all is that we should be concerned about the global warming that will occur at the end of time. This is what's most important. In 2 Peter chapter 3, beginning verse 9, the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. Notice that in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, the elements shall melt with fervent heat, the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. That's what's coming. What's going to happen to planet Earth? What's going to happen to the climate on planet Earth? Well, simply put, God's going to sustain everything until he's ready for it to end. My computer just went out of here. Hang on a minute. Let's see where we're at. Yeah, okay. I don't know what's going on there. God's going to keep things functioning until he's ready to bring it to an end. But it's going to come to an end. The elements will melt with fervent heat. The earth and the works that are therein shall be burned up. This whole physical creation, the whole universe is going to be brought to an end. But what I think is really interesting, since we know that, seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of person shall we be? And then the text goes on to describe holy living in the sight of God. Since we know that this is all temporary anyway, right? Everything about the physical creation is temporary. It's all going to be brought to an end. Since we know that, and since we're aware of that, then that should affect our decisions about how we live. We should live a holy life in service to God because we know where this is all heading. We've got the information about what's going to happen to our physical universe. Well, just some thoughts. Again, this is a subject I never even thought to bring a lesson on, but came across some information that sort of spurred my imagination, if you will. And I thought that'd be worthy to talk about because it's so much in the news. We hear about climate change and global warming in the news all the time. And actually, we have some biblical insights that pertain to that. Thanks for listening. Hope it's interesting. We're going to sing a song of invitation. As we sing this song, we'll be asking you, make sure your life is right with God. If not, let us help you. If you need to obey the gospel plan of salvation, say so. We'd be anxious to assist or anxious to study more with you. If you're a Christian in need of the prayers of the saints, we'd be glad to pray with you and for you. If we can help, let us know while we stand and sing this song.